Thank you all so much for joining us this morning. You're waking up this morning, and the world continues. The HDC situation continues to unfold. Well, in some areas, you look at the front page of your newspaper and you realize that there's an exaggeration of a very simple statement made by a former Minister of Housing. But I guess everybody's reaching, everybody's looking. We've got a special lineup for you today. We're dealing into two areas. One organization, as you know, I've been praising extensively. Any watchdog organization that I see coming to the fore. Transparency International is an international group, and they are known throughout the world for what they do. There is a Trinidad and Tobago component, and they are doing work in that area. I am going to be talking to that guest in 30 seconds right after I let you know. In the second hour, we will be speaking to three members of the Employers Consultative Association. I fell in love with their statement, as I think most folks would, saying it is time for consultation, not confrontation, as it relates to the entrepreneurs and labor. So Caroline Francois Pt.1, who is the CEO of that organization, along with directors Neil Deryck and Giselle Estrada, will be joining us here inside hour number 2. I saw this gentleman, and I am not going to tell you how long ago. And of course, well, let's put it this way. When you think of cricket, you think of one name. He's not here in that capacity, but hey, it is. You can't change history and you can't change the fact. He is unquestionably the wicketkeeper that's synonymous with West Indies cricket in the diamond years, the great years. He is Deryck Lance Murray. He is now the chairman of Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute, and it is really a great pleasure to have you here this morning. Good morning to you.
Thanks very much, Rennie. It's a pleasure to be here, and thanks for the memories as well. Unfortunately, we can't talk too much about good cricket, but the memories are still there.
I can still talk about good cricket just by saying Deryck Murray. I just spoke about good cricket. If I talk Lance Gibbs and I talk about Gary Sobers and I talk about Colin Croft and Kurt Ambrose, we're talking good cricket there. But that for later, this for now. You, among other things, you served as a career diplomat in the Foreign Service of Trinidad and Tobago for the period 1978 to 1989. You're also well known as one of the heroes of the halcyon days, as aforementioned, of West Indies cricket. You achieved in 1989, you were inducted into the TNT Sports Hall of Fame, as you should be. 4 years before that, you got the Shakonia Gold Medal. So that's the list of what you're doing. However, you saw that there's a lot more to be done. And I am not surprised at that, because when you consider that you graduated with honors, your bachelor degree, industrial economics at the University of Notting Hill, England, and you read economics and history at Cambridge University, I know you would not sit still. And you have not done that. You are now the chairman of the Transparency Institute. Explain to our listeners who are not Ankara with the Transparency Institute what that organization is about. A quick synopsis of it, please.
Right. We are one of the 100 national chapters of Transparency International, whose vision is for a world in which politics, government, civil society, the daily lives of people are free of corruption. And we in Trinidad and Tobago have adopted that wholeheartedly and want to see a nation and a region that is free of corruption.
Many times people confuse a watchdog group with a gotcha group. And there is a very big difference. A watchdog group is to see a continuum of good behavior or good governance, as against a gotcha group, which would have their own agenda. Am I correct in that?
Well, again, and we don't even like the term watchdog so much. It's really an advocacy group.
Okay.
We do preach out against corruption where we see it, but it's really promoting good governance and looking at the integrity and morality in public service, recognizing that public service does not happen on its own. Private sector and civil society are all involved, and therefore we see a need for working together to ensure good governance.
I think the first line in that book of King David would say, I am Alpha and I am Omega. So good governance and corruption run alongside each other. The area of corruption is our discussion right now. In Trinidad and Tobago, corruption is treated almost as a way of life. I asked the question, Has this always been so, or do we see a new definition of acceptance, a new acceptance of corruption? Because hitherto, somebody would do something on the side, I'd mention it, and somebody would do it kind of guardedly. Now folks are doing it with impunity. So is there a new definition, a new normal that has made corruption an everyday acceptable thing?
No, it's certainly not acceptable. I think what has happened is that it is so prevalent that we tend to think that this is how things are and this is how they work. But I'm still convinced that the vast majority, the overwhelming majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago are good, honest citizens. They work hard. They ensure that their children and grandchildren are brought up with the kind of principles and morality that we always had. Right is right, wrong is wrong. But sometimes it gets clouded. It gets clouded in a lot of the jargon and spin that people put on it. And I think it is essential that we stick to the basics and ensure that what is happening is really what we as people really want. And one of the recent focus points for the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency is our Transparency Youth. We've created a youth membership that is very vibrant, but also very innovative in use of social media, etc.
So important, yes.
So that they reinforce their own beliefs that they want to get ahead on merit. They want to see exams conducted in a way that is pure and clean, and all the corruption that goes on with that. And it is so important to get to them at that early stage in their development before they get tainted by what seems to pass, as you said, Rennie, maybe normal. And we need to reinforce for them that that is not the way, and we will be there supporting them to ensure that we have a much brighter, cleaner future.
I'm very encouraged in the fact that your organization recognized that with the new method of dissemination of information, and additionally, the fact that you've got to grab them before the world already said to them, this is the new way to go. You're reaching out for them. And those who are just tuning in, the voice you're hearing is that of the esteemed Deryck Lance Murray, who's the chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute. We are going to get down to some more specifics of the governance area, but there is an attitude we have to deal with first, and that's what I'm attempting for us to just explore here before we get there. It is a wink and a nod. A wink and a nod is what folks do when they see practices that are inimical to not just good governance, but just productivity in the whole. And I wonder if the reason why we wink and allow it to happen is because we find that if we point it out, the mote in somebody's eye is going to show up the log in our own. In other words, folks, because it is convenient for them to say, hey man, it's a Trinidad thing, and you get into work 10 minutes later and you duck an hour or something like that. You don't point out the other person doing it for fear of exposing yourself. I wonder if that is playing into this equation in the what seems to be acceptance. Well, it doesn't seem to be. What is acceptance of this behavior?
Yeah, and you're right, and we need to be careful of that. When we talk about things happening in the public service or in the private sector, etc., it really reflects on us.
Yes.
And I think going back to the basics, you have to look in the mirror, and start there, and then we start. Even with our own organizations, so all the civil society organizations that in different ways complaining, advocating, pointing out what's wrong in the system. Are we ourselves trying to live the good governance that we want to preach? So that's one aspect of it as well. But I think it's also, and again coming back to the youth theme, it's also important that we recognize that our kids are coming into contact with this at an earlier and earlier stage. I mentioned exams, and the whole question of whether exam papers are available before the exams. That's one thing.
Or the computer allows them to cheat on the side.
That's right. We expose them to it when they go for their driver's license, for probably their first interface with adult life. And there's so many things that we need to start saying, we have to get it right. So if a kid pays, to get their driver's license, who's provided them with the money to do that? And so you start the questions going right the way back to
and that's interesting that you take it
and
there. Mm-hmm.
It really is an attitudinal change that we need. We have almost become lax in, we're going to get by, we're going to do it. But I think we need to take more control.
When it does not work for us, nepotism is a big problem. However, when we give a family member a blight, or we make a call and help out somebody else, get somebody moved up in a position, we're doing exactly the same thing. I mean, that's our gateway to the dishonest acceptance.
Yeah. That's right. And I think, we need to look at it. And yes, every organization will approach it from a different perspective. But so much of it is interlocked. And you can't get away from one without the other. So while you may talk of corruption and a high level with the millions of dollars being frittered away on public sector projects, building a school, building a hospital, a highway, whatever, it goes right the way down to the bottom. And there is where you need to start looking at it. And talk about it in terms of, so transparency would be focusing on the corruption issues, etc. But there is also crime, there's also domestic violence, there's also, all the other issues to look at which are not divorced. Because it is, as you say, if it's okay to do it like this, then we can do it like that, and then it just multiplies. And we really need to really start working more together as civil society organizations, covering different fields, different aspects, and really work to make sure that civil society, at the end of the day, we are the ones that control governments. We control the opposition. That's how, not just once a year by voting, not once every 5 years, by voting, but it's a constant monitoring, constant interaction with the authorities in every aspect to ensure that the daily lives of people are what we want it to be.
Transparency, T&T will be looking at good governance. That is part of the mission statement. But, that also works in what happens. A lot of folks, for some reason, seem as though the narrative seems to be the major corruption happens only in government. Not so.
And that's one of the things. And maybe, and I've said it before in less public space, maybe the use of the word corruption tends to cloud over, too many things. So immediately you talk to the average person, corruption, and as you say, it then becomes something that happens in boardrooms, something that happens in big business, etc. But we really need to start looking at, maybe just using the word stealing, thieving, whatever, because that's where it starts.
Yes.
And so we need to understand that it is right through the system. Our national institutions are undermined by it. When you talk about not just government, but the judiciary, the legal systems, you're going to the sports organizations, and everywhere there is evidence of, not just not accounting for money.
There's a big lesson to be
but
had
as you say,
from
it's nepotism, cronyism, all the likes.
Yes.
Yeah.
You have a judge with someone before him on a drunk driving charge, for instance, and he happens to be of the upper echelon, and he gets himself probation and a couple of $1,000s, which he can pay, and you get another guy coming up with the same thing, and he gets himself 3 years. When you've got the double justice inside of it, then folks start feeling the integrity integrity of the institution becomes the issue. We started this conversation on the individual because, rightly as you said, we must start from the individual up. There are many who argue which comes first, the chicken or the egg, because they look at the government the way it is and they say, well, the example should be set from top down. I mean, you have folks who are elected to office and you get the feeling when you look at them brandishing a lifestyle that's inconsistent with the compensation we know they're receiving, and there is no accountability. Folks say, well, when you get there, it's your turn to take. Now, they may not ever ascend to the ministerial level. However, these are the public servants. These are the folks who get in there, and if the mind is already shaped, get what you can. This is not an indictment of the public service now. Please don't misunderstand me, folks. I'm just saying it is the mindset of well, it's not that bad. Well, okay. Well, maybe I could steal this. Maybe I could take an hour. Maybe I could. So it has to be it's just the chicken or the egg, which goes first. However, I feel that the government have a particular, and that's why I called your group the watchdog, but you said you don't particularly like that. But I need someone who's watching from the top down to say, guys, every move you make, we are watching. Not because we are watching you. Yes, we want good governance, but we want our children to grow up understanding there is a thing called acts and consequences.
Exactly. And I think your focus, Rennie, on the individual is not misplaced. Because even when we talk of the government and we talk of cabinet, we talk of, the judiciary, we talk of the public service, whatever, all of those are made up of individuals. And if each individual sets out to do the right thing, then you on the path to doing the right thing as a group. But it's if you shirk your responsibility as an individual, then you then start weakening the collective,
Yes.
etc. So,
Yes.
and I think also people have to accept that even though they aspire to be a CEO or politician or judge or sportsman or whatever, you are, by definition, an exemplar.
That's right.
People
That's right.
look up to you as an example. And what you do in your field, once you're in the public image, then you are being seen as an example. And therefore, what you do without consequences then becomes okay. And I think we need to focus more on what the individuals contribute to their organization.
While you were sitting in the green room, we were here in studio and talking about one person made the statement, well, it's a case of this new generation, and it is never the case of the new generation because, as I said before, children cease to be children when adults cease to be adults. And if you create a vacuum, then the folks are going to find something to compare the new norm to if you don't set it down. So the generation has to do something. It is one of the reasons that you see I salute you outside of your many achievements, because you did not say, okay, I've done this, let me sit on my laurels and move on with my life. No, you said, let us go towards something for good governance. Part of keeping with what your organization, Transparency Trinidad and Tobago, is doing. Deryck Murray is my guest. He is the CEO of that organization. Is in that capacity we have in conversation this morning. No, don't ask me anything about cricket. We're not talking about. So in that area, we get into the question of what is something that I know your group, like any good advocacy group, would welcome, which is whistleblower legislation. Former HDC Managing Director Jolene John recently said she is ready to, with the proper laws, sing like a canary. I will be the first in line, she said. Now, whistleblower legislation is proposed. Have you seen it, and does it have the teeth and independence to be effective?
I think it's a starting point. And yes, there are one or two clauses within there that you would like to see strengthened, etc. But along with the legislation, and I think it is important, and we as a group will be making our submissions early in the new year on those issues, is where will the protection really come from? Because that protection has to come, A, from within your own companies first.
Yes.
B, within the wider circle, whether it's the police, whether it's the judiciary, legislature, whatever. So it's all well and good to have things written down on a piece of paper, and even if it was the perfect legislation, you would then need to make sure it is enforced, and the whistleblower has the confidence to know that, yes, if I go in my little company and I say something, I am protected within my company from victimization, from pressurized being, whatever.
Retaliation.
And I think that is important. But whistleblower protection is so important to everything that we are talking about.
You have walked exactly in the area, because when I looked at whistleblower legislation, I, like you, said good, but I said, are we aware of how costly a whistleblower legislation being seen through is? One, we've got to get protection for this person. We may have to move them from the place of employ, which means they've got a life and a family to take care of. We've got to provide for them. Trinidad and Tobago is exactly this small. So if it is of a big nature, it means this person is blacklisted for a long time. Where do we put them? How do we sustain their life? How do we take care of their family that we may have to relocate? It is a big piece of legislation that sounds really good, that I welcome. But I am too very concerned of, if we have thought out, if we see all that's involved in having an effective whistleblower piece of legislation working.
Yeah, and I think the first thing that we should establish is that, yes, we want this whistleblower protection, and it's a step in the right direction. So anything that comes in will be good. We have examples of how it works in Norway, Canada, a number of places, and therefore we should learn from those experiences and what are the shortfalls, what needs to be done. I think what we also need to do is start changing attitudes. Now, there's one clause that I will highlight in this conversation, Rennie, is where it talks about the whistleblower doesn't enjoy the protection of the law if it is done for personal gain. Right. What I want us to say is that one thing about whistleblowing should be that the whistleblower should, in fact, be praised, rewarded in some way. So whether that's financial reward or reward by being promoted, which they had been denied, whatever. So there should be a recognition that whistleblowing should be applauded and recognized.
Yes.
And therefore, you need to have that enshrined in the legislation. Obviously, there need to be safeguards that it's not malicious whistleblowing, etc.
But that's interesting, because it's almost as though you went before the bar here, because that's a very important point you make. When you make the distinction that it cannot be for self-gain, it makes it easy for a defense attorney to argue, well, as a consequence of this will happen and he will move up the pole, and then you have destroyed the whole thing. Yeah. So that's something we have to be very mindful of. Thank you.
But that's, and I mean, that's also need to change, because the attitude of people now, if someone is a whistleblower, is that, oh, you're trying to cause harm to the company, to the boss, the whatever. Whereas it should be the other way around. You are trying to make sure that we are doing the right thing.
Indeed.
Therefore, you should be lauded for what you do. And I think that is a really major aspect that we need to look at, and so that people are prepared to come forward. Now, a lot of people do come forward, but they get to the stage where, having given information about what is happening, as soon as you say, well, look, we really should go to the fraud squad, we should go to some investigative body, police complaints authority, whatever. Okay, but I don't want my name called, etc. So you know the facts of what is happening, but you can't take it to a conclusion. And I think that is so important, that we get into this legislation that allows people to feel confident that they can and should and must, whistleblow when the occasion arises.
That is confidence in the institution, confidence in the institution that is undermined when you have a case like what happened recently with the Integrity Commission. But that's a whole different ball game. But it is related. There is another part of this that we have to look at. When you're talking about whistleblowing, you're talking about the judiciary must be called upon for us to speed up this process. You cannot have a whistleblower bringing a case and then you sit down for about 3 years before it comes before a hearing. And when it does, it's postponed for another 3 years. In the meantime, this whistleblower is suffering on the vine. That's the part of the legislation that I keep watching with a jaundiced eye, like you said, warmly embracing a whistleblower legislation is one thing. Now tell me how we're going to work this thing out. Because if you put it in, you know what we say in radio, you never get a second chance to make a first impression. Yeah. So after you introduce it, someone comes forward in any case, the one that's highlighted, whether it's a big case or a small case, but if it's highlighted, and then folks see, for instance, this person's out on the vine, nothing is happening. There is no way you're going to convince people again for a long time to come back to do this.
That's right. And if you have to work in an environment where a report is made and not acted on in a very timely manner, you then expose the whistleblower to everything negative that tends to happen. Some of the things that you like in the bill that is before us is the responsibility it puts on the individual companies to establish a reporting unit. Yes. And particularly the fact that the reporting unit is answerable to a specific director of the company. So you are giving it a kind of legitimacy within the company. But again, it's being able to act on that in a very timely manner, and also being able to depend on the other organizations and institutions around the company, around and involved in the actual legislation, to be able to play their part and to make sure that they do that in a timely manner as well.
The voice that you hear in this Sunday morning is that of Deryck Lance Murray, esteemed West Indian cricketer. He is the chairman of the Trinidad and Tobago Transparency Institute. That is the area that he's put his energy right now and his expertise equally. We will continue talking about that. We're going to take a very quick break and we're going to come back. We are just on the level of whistleblower legislation. There's one aspect of it because in Trinidad and Tobago, because it is, we're a small country, and you have someone in a big case. Unfortunately, crime is as such, well, life has been whittled down to almost next to nothing. So folks are worried about their personal safety. And that's the sort of thing. When we talk about a whistleblower coming forward, and then you say, okay, we will get you protection and put you in a safe house. Question is, a safe house where? It's Trinidad and Tobago. We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more, including what is happening inside Transparency International, some of the things they are looking at specifically, and spend a little more time on the question of good governance, which is at the top of the agenda.